Morning, everyone. Welcome to this Thursday morning webinar series. I'm Chloe Tetchell, the health coach here with Ready Care. For this morning, I'm going to be chatting around specific topic in line with tomorrow's World Mental Health Day. And the theme of this year is about the importance of mental and psychological supports in times of crises. Now, last week I touched a little bit, well, quite a bit actually, on VUCA environments and how we look after ourselves in that. And when I say VUCA, I mean volatile, unpredictable, complex and ambiguous times. So basically an awful lot of the times that we live in due to hyperconnectivity, how that has an impact on our well-being and our self-care. For today, the topic I'll be covering is the fine line between essentially upholding good boundaries while maintaining high levels of empathy, because of course, we're empathetic creatures. We don't want to get rid of our humanity. We want to maintain our humanity, but we really want to do that in a way that's protective and doesn't get us into a specific position where we experience fatigue, high levels of anxiety and high levels of depression, which due to the level of access to content, and I use the word purposefully here, content that is designed to provoke, quite a large emotional reaction in us, because of course, the more emotional reaction that we have to specific things, the more algorithmically we're inclined to engage with things. So there are a lot of very difficult, complex situations occurring worldwide, between famines, between wars. And now more so than ever, we have constant eyes on that. And there's a balance between the civic human desire to not want to look away, not want to put our head in the sand, while also acknowledging the impact that access to this type of footage, knowledge has on us. And there's a phrase my mom used to say to me when I was young and got into the news when I was very small. And she said, you can only really, whatever your arm can touch, that's your direct line of influence. And even though we can care about people and places and events around the world, how we are in ourselves and how well balanced and able to positively impact those around us will actually create far greater supports globally. So I'm just going to pop this on there for you guys. So the rising crisis of compassion fatigue. Now, this is something that really was first spotted with regards to COVID times, within that time period, understanding that our ability to care and our ability to put up, protective layers was greatly impacted. So there was a 25% increase over 2020, reported by the World Health Organization, in global anxiety and depression. And it's very easy to see why, because again, there and since, there's been a level of hyperconnectivity that we've never had before. Now, there's plus sides to that, but because we're empathetic creatures, it's a new phenomenon for us to be so deeply embedded in all of these different lattices of complexity, there we go, that's the word, that we've never prior to this age had access to. So it's very normal for us to have empathy, to be able to care, to be able to place ourselves in other people's shoes. But the level at which physiologically and societally we were willing and able to do that prior to very recently extended, as I said, to the people in your family, your friends, the people in your communities, and the people in perhaps your larger communities. That could be your nations, your towns. And you can hear about other people in other places and feel that pang. But there's something very visceral about imagery, sounds, and seeing things for how they are. So how do we care deeply without losing ourselves in it? And this is where the concept of personal boundaries comes in, which is quite misunderstood, particularly if you're somebody who's quite empathetic by nature. Now, it is one of our beautiful human traits. It's our capacity to feel, but there's a little bit of a double-edged sword, and for any of us on the call, that could relate to, being quite a bleeding heart type of person. Without limits, empathy without boundaries can basically lean us into burnout and, unfortunately, resentment. And that might seem like, jeepers, how can you equate that? But if you're constantly giving and giving, that whole adage of you can't pour from an empty cup, there's going to be a point where you feel empty and you feel that even normal human interaction feels like it's pulling from you beyond the remits and capabilities of what you can give. And this is what's dubbed the compassion fatigue. It's very, very normal in caring professions like carers, social workers, nurses, doctors, caring professions. But basically, globally, there's a secondary trauma on a global scale happening because of our near constant exposure to contents like violence, death, injustice, where it's basically underlying our natural feelings of powerlessness, because we do not have, in some capacity, on a symbolic level, yes, every voice counts, but in a real visceral way, we do not have a power when we watch atrocities happen to stop it. And there's a very interesting thought experiment to do with that, or a way to highlight it. Is essentially an awful lot of torture places where intelligence officers, quote unquote intelligence officers, ironic naming for some of these people, unfortunately, used to torture people that they would think of as holding crucial intelligence information. And one of the ways that they used to do that is to make it so a more impactful way to bring a human being into a crumbling state where they're willing to give up any type of information has less to do with how much they can endure, but actually constantly hearing either a recording of or somebody in the next room in pain actually broke people down quicker. And we could really see that in our day-to-day. So the answer around that isn't to become cold, right? And that's something I want to underpin here quite a lot, because that can be one of the springback effects that we feel, look, I have to become this very cold, I can't care about anything because it's harming me. So world needs human beings with compassion. The difficulty is an awful lot of us have not built very healthy boundaries around that. Now, it affects women more than men, but it does affect some men as well. And healthy boundaries are basically where you have the ability to be you and recognize who the other is, and that you can sympathize more so than empathize, that you basically don't take on all of the pain of what they're going through and then go about your day. Because if you remember from last week, how you view the world and the thoughts that you have about the world, yourself, your abilities, your power, they all have a domino effect on how you conduct yourself in a day and how you're basically able to show up for yourself and others. So how you create your boundaries actually gives autonomy to yourself and other people. There's no compassion without empathy, and there's no proper compassion and empathy without boundaries, because what happens otherwise is you just become enmeshed. And if you're a parent, this will ring true an awful lot more, where it's very difficult to see somebody that you really, really care about in a very difficult scenario, because you take on all of their feelings around it. So to empathize means to feel with someone. I'm going to just move my little slide here. To empathize basically means to feel with someone, to step in their shoes, Boundaries will give you lines and definitions where you end and the other person begins. And the way that I think about this, which could be quite abstract, but I'll lay it out anyway. So you need light and you need dark, right? If you only ever had one, let's say empathy is darkness, there's no boundaries to anything. And when you're in the harsh light of day, yes, sometimes, or in the harsh light of truth, I should say, even, sometimes there's a bit of a shock of this is here, this is that. But the two of them work together to basically delineate where I end and the world begins, right? And oftentimes people with high empathy, really high caring, high compassion, have difficulty upholding boundaries because what it can be felt as is a rejection of the other, or on the flip side, a rejection of themselves by the other. So sometimes when people put quite natural organic boundaries between somebody, between ourselves and somebody else, but ourselves could be somebody with a very, very soft heart, we will read that as rejection rather than a boundary of, I take care of this internally, you take care of that. So boundary setting isn't a rejection. It's an act of self-respect, right? Where you have the delineation of who you are, and you are much more able to make a decision based on mutual respect when you acknowledge that there's self and other. This might seem really fundamental, but particularly in an Irish framework, actually, like globally, we're not excellent at doing that. We're in a culture where you will is very normal, and doing things because we feel like it's expected or because we feel that we have to, or it would be impolite, is a big one in Irish culture, to say no. We have a huge problem within Ireland with saying no and putting down proper boundaries. Now, you'll know this from a work perspective, where if you take on and you say that you can do more than you can do, what you'll get is resentment because you're exhausted, and somebody saying, come here to me, you said you'd be able to do that. What's the story? So acknowledging that there is a specific level that you can both operate at is much, much better. So if you think of boundaries as the framework that makes supportive relationships sustainable, you are both able as adults, if it's an adult to adult relationship, to have your own autonomy within that. So boundaries are like a therapeutic framework around a counseling session. They'll create a safe container, which means there's empathy and healing can happen, or communication more effectively can happen, without becoming overwhelmed, without becoming burnt out by it. So empathy without boundaries isn't at all it's not a sustainable, compassionate route at all. So we have a tendency to over-identify with other people's feelings, take on their problem as if they were our own, and basically that is not a good way to operate long-term. Now, let me make this a little bit bigger. Can I make this bigger? I can't. So when we have the balance of both of those, it basically is going to allow us to, if I could use the analogy, right? If we don't want to have walls because we still want to be able to showcase our adaptability, or empathy, or care, we want to be able to receive that back, because if we're walled off, we're not able to receive it. So the best way to do that is to think of ourselves as having a gate, right? It's not like a big wall, it's a gate. Some things can come in, some things can come out. And it basically means that you won't be taking on every Tom, Dick, and Harry's problems, the three-legged puppy syndrome, or I have to work more because my coworkers are feeling a bit burnt out, and constantly self-sacrificing. If you're in a constant state of having no boundaries, your empathy is pointless, right? And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but you will become exhausted, resentful, probably mean-spirited, pick up all these coughs and colds, can't sleep at night because I'm stressed out, and you're going to become a little shell of a human aspect of yourself, which is no good to you. But also, if your primary goal in all of this is to help others, you're going to be absolutely no good to anybody else in that as well. So what you want to be doing really is developing those boundaries. Now, a good way, hang on, how do we get rid of, sorry, my slides always annoy me. So if you're not too sure where to start with building some positive boundaries, think of things along the lines of, to protect my energy and my peace, it is okay for me to fill in the blank. For some people, that's going to be, ask for help. For some people, that's going to be ask for additional time. It's okay for me to not feel like I'm constantly performing at my best. It is okay for me to tell people, can you call me back later, right? And for those that are very close with their families, it can be very difficult, but very, very small steps towards building boundaries. Asking for additional time, or if you sense yourself falling into that, people pleasing, I have to do this, I have to do that, and not seeing where your own boundaries lie with that. Really getting curious about, if I was to think of a perimeter around me that was safeguarding my time and my energy, what are some of the biggest markers that are pulling on that at the moment? More often it's an uncomfortable conversation because it tends to be people and things that we care about way more than it is people that we've never met in our lives. With that, so there's, what can I do to safeguard my time and my energy? The other one is, to safeguard my time and my energy, people may not ... and that can be call on me at all time and hours of the day, interrupt something that I'm doing for myself to prioritize them. Now, as I said, I know if you've got a child to adult relationship, sometimes the lines on that are a little bit blurry, but essentially it's really starting to see, where are the edges here? Where am I? Where do I feel I'm being pulled from? And are there particular stories that I'm telling myself that I have to constantly be available? And why do I constantly have to be available? Now, if we're to transpose this to a global scale, and we're to look at it in terms of timelines, online presence, YouTube timelines, Instagram timelines, X or Twitter timelines, is there something driving my need to want to know, right? And I get really, really honest with this. If most people can tell they're starting to get a little bit pulled, and they're starting to feel a little bit like they're lacking boundaries, and it's taking from them personally. So if you notice yourself in a workplace, family, social, work, cultural, global setting where that's starting to creep in, start to notice when you feel it, what type of content it is, whether it's a family conversation, this or that, and ask yourself really brutally honestly, why do I feel like I need to constantly participate in this? For some people, it is absolutely tied to an underlying belief that could be a core limiting belief of that you picked up when you were very, very small, that will say, I have to always be available because if I don't, people mightn't like me. That's a huge one, huge one, particularly for younger people. They feel that if they're not constantly, I say younger people, but that extends to all ages, really. It's just more prevalent with younger people. If I'm not constantly available, people mightn't like me. People might forget about me. If I'm not constantly offering my help, people might think I'm incompetent. So start to get really, really curious about what's happening there, because really what it is you want to build the appropriate boundary. You want to build one that isn't just saying no to everything all the time if that doesn't fit with who you are. You want to really, really find out where it is that there's a porous boundaries. And boundaries start very small. If you're somebody that's not used to it, a really, really good tip I can give is, if you're somebody that's not used to putting up boundaries, start with a microdose amount, where instead of saying no, right, if you don't want to say no, and if you're not there yet, you can say, can I get back to you on that in a minute, right? If somebody says, hey, we're going such and such a place, and you say, I don't really want to go at all, but you find yourself going, oh yeah, and then catch yourself and put a little bit of a pause between saying yes and where you actually want to be at. So that could include saying things like, can I get back to you on that? Can I call you back in 5 minutes? Can I check my schedule? All very, very small things with that, and whatever that may be. So know your limits and honor them. Start by getting really, really clear on what your personal limits are emotionally, physically, and time-wise. How many social outings per week can keep you feeling energized versus drained? How late can you take a phone call at night without it interrupting your sleep and your downtime? And then you're exhausted the following day, and whoever it is that rang you with all the problems in the whole world is sleeping absolutely soundly, and you're wide awake. And then the following day, you're absolutely exhausted, eating stuff you don't want to eat, knocking back the coffees, like going, God almighty, how am I going to get through this day? How much of that can you do? How much distressing news can you read before it impacts your mood? Now, with that, get real honest with yourself. Is it a case of, I need to take a few days of a break here, and I understand that there are various atrocities happening in the world. I'm going to put a little bit of space, right? I'm not saying I'm never looking at these things again. I'm going to put a bit of space, and I'm going to ask myself, what is it that drives me to want to do more? Or what is it that drives me to want to see these things? Oftentimes it's going to be because we wish we could help, right? Is there something I can do? Is there something you can do with various things that are pulling your attention that are an actual felt thing, be it an email to a TD, be it a little bit of money donation that you can afford, whatever it may be? Is there an action that you can do that's going to bring back your sense of power, even a very small amount? Because essentially, and this is the tough thing to grapple with, particularly on a global scale when lots of things are coming at us, just being aware of things doesn't help. It actually doesn't. And that's the harsh truth. It helps more than not being aware, but it doesn't actually help to reinstill your sense of power and control and empathy. Empathy needs somewhere to go, right? It's an action word. It's something that we do. If we just carry it all the time, we're not actually helping. So it's having a degree of realism with that as well. Probably coming off the phone and, giving to a particular organization, or giving some time to an organization, or giving yourself a small action step is likely to make you feel a lot better in all of that than simply scrolling. That is not going to help you. You're going to end up being an empty cup. So communicating and I'll finish up quite quickly here, sorry. Communicating boundaries clearly and kindly. So it's quite an important point, actually. When somebody's not used to communicating healthy boundaries, they will infer things. They will say things in their own minds like, well, I said it in a tone that wasn't really that optimistic. Surely they should have picked up on the subtext. No, you are an adult. It is up to you to say where you're at with stuff. I say this as a redeemed doormat. When you're too empathetic with very bad boundaries, you're going to get cross with people for not reading your subtext. And what has a tendency to happen is people will overstep the mark, and then you will lose it, right? You will go postal or shout, or maybe not full postal, but you will end up barking at people. And that is the true meaning of the word having passive aggressive communication style, right? So getting comfortable with kindly, you don't need to over-explain, asserting your boundaries is a huge step forward. And practice the art of saying, not just now. So allowing other people to have boundaries is extremely important as well. Start to be on the lookout of people that you know and like and respect who are good at practicing boundaries. So basically, coming back into it all, having a good balance of your empathy is going to allow you to practice your humanity towards people. If you don't practice having boundaries alongside with it, you are going to get net negative results. You're going to feel probably taken advantage of, resentment, powerless, exhausted. Those are ways in that state, if you're embodying that state, you are not capable in the right way, in the more supported, centralized way, to actually support others, right? So if your end goal is to support others, it is vital and crucial to begin to bring in a little bit of boundaries. And that can start not just by saying no, but it can start by giving a little bit of space between the demand and your response. That can be things like, not right now, let me have a think about it, let me get back to you in a few days, can you call me back in a little while? So that allows you to take that step, re-centralize, and think, what do I actually want to do? And to practice kindly stating your boundaries. Get curious about why you find yourself in specific scenarios that constantly pull and drag, and be mindful of blaming others for it, right? So if we're people that are huge bleeding hearts with bad boundaries, we will say, God, they're always asking things of me. And if I can have anything to take away for today, is we treat people how to treat us, right? That's an uncomfortable truth sometimes, but we do we teach people how to treat us. So if we teach people that it's always okay to take from us night and day, shoes, shirt, money, time, energy, they will, what's it, givers have to push boundaries because takers don't, right? So get comfortable with that and be on the lookout for other people expressing their boundaries as well. People you like, know, and trust. Just when you read specific interactions, just say, oh, I just noticed they did that really skillfully. How can I bring it into it? So I'll close it up for today because I'm going on and on, but essentially for World Mental Health Day tomorrow, it's all about how do we stay centered when the entire world feels very ambiguous, very all over the place. And in the talk that I gave last week, if you missed it, I went into an awful lot of how we can center ourselves within that. So finding our center in that is very important. Retaining our humanity in that is extremely important. And part of that is asserting healthy boundaries. If you think of a king, right, or a ruler or a leader, because we're all our personal leaders, somebody who's too soft, the entire kingdom's going to go to pot very, very quickly, right? Somebody who's too harsh, there'd probably be wars and everybody would be miserable. What you want is an equal balance of the two forces together, right? I hope you found that helpful. Any comments and questions, as always, please let me know. And we will chat to you next time. Bye now.